and linked on our website for those who missed the session or would want to watch it again. Si necesita ayuda en español, por favor, envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. This evening's session will focus on aligning feeder patterns for areas impacted by changes in the 2025 plan and other recommendations to address overcrowding and continued growth in the Western area. As a reminder, today's session was prepared by the Office of Student Assignment. And the information we will review with you this evening is a subset of the full presentation that was shared with the board during their work session on September 2nd. Several supplemental materials related to the development of this year's plan were also shared with the board during their work session on September 2nd. You can find these with the board materials for the September 2nd work session. 4B is a review of information shared with the board during previous work sessions. 4C is an updated version of the public engagement summary report. 4D includes PDF versions of the current draft of proposed attendance boundary changes that allow you to zoom in to the street level. And 4E includes data reports used to inform projected enrollment for impacted schools. You can access all of these materials and find additional resources by visiting the 2026 enrollment proposal page on our district website. Again, this evening's session will focus on aligning feeder patterns for areas impacted by changes in the 2025-26 student assignment plan and other recommendations to address crowding and continued growth in the Western area. Before we begin, let me go over some logistics for tonight. Our session will last for no more than an hour and a half. We will begin with a presentation and conclude by responding to questions from today's session. We recognize that even now and throughout the session, you may have questions regarding the proposal or the recommended stability rules. To capture your questions, we will be using the Q&A feature within Google Meet. To access this feature from a computer, please click on the grid shape in the toolbar on your screen. If you are using a mobile device, select the three dots first, then select the icon with the three shapes. You should then see a Q&A feature identified by a question mark icon. To ensure your questions are anonymous, our host and moderators will be monitoring the Q&A for questions and capturing them throughout this evening's sessions. Once you see that your question has been removed from the Q&A, that means that your question has been successfully captured by our moderators and you do not need to submit your question again. We will make every effort to respond to your questions toward the end of our session. In addition, we will use your questions to update the FAQ portion of our website. Si necesita ayuda en español, por favor, envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. In addition, we are asking that you contribute to the larger community discussion related to this initial draft of the 2026-2027 school enrollment proposal via Thought Exchange. The Thought Exchange will remain open through October 5th, After it has closed, we will summarize the feedback received and will share this summary with the board during their work session on October 21st. No one will be personally identified in the summary. Before I turn things over to Susan, we would like to remind you that today's session will focus on aligning feeder patterns for areas impacted by changes in the 2025-26 plan and other recommendations to address crowding and continued growth in the Western area. By the end of this evening's session, you will have had an opportunity to briefly review the assignment planning process, extensively review the recommendations included in the initial draft specific to your area of the district, quickly review the timeline for the planning process, and perhaps most importantly, submit questions you have that will help you gain a better understanding of the potential impacts of the proposed plan for your family. And now I will turn things over to Susan.
Thank you, Jimmy, for welcoming our participants. And thank you to all of you for joining us tonight for this important discussion. We are very grateful for this opportunity to share with you information included in the current proposal for the 2026-27 school enrollment plan. To provide some context, on September 2nd, staff members presented the initial draft of the new student enrollment proposal to the Board of Education. The draft includes proposed school assignment changes for the 2026-27 school year. So that's the next school year. This year's student assignment proposal does focus on the opening of Hilltop Needmore Elementary, but it also includes elements to help align feeder patterns in areas that were impacted by recent elementary changes, as Jimmy mentioned, and relieving capped and overcrowded schools while filling underutilized schools. Many of the recommendations included in the plan will allow students to attend a less crowded school, and some of them will even allow students to attend a school that's closer to home. The proposal will also include recommendations for stability rules, and we know those are very important for families to understand how they might access those if they're impacted by the recommendations included in the proposal. As a reminder, all of the information that we will share during tonight's presentation, along with tools and resources to help you better understand the recommendations included in the initial draft, can be found on our website. The enrollment proposal site here is specific to this draft or this version of the enrollment plan, the 2026-27 enrollment plan, and this will be updated regularly throughout this process, up to and including the board's approval of the plan. If you're looking for more information about the planning process, which we'll talk about briefly tonight, but not in great detail, you're also welcome to visit our assignment planning site. This site is up at all times. We do recognize, and as Jimmy shared earlier, that some of you may already have questions and some of you may just now be joining us and miss the instructions. So really quickly, if you're on a computer, you're looking for this grid shape here at the bottom of your toolbar, and then that will lead you to this question mark, and that's where you can post your questions. If you're on a mobile device, you're going to look for these three dots, and then you're going to look for three shapes. It's like a triangle, a square, and a circle, and then you'll get to the Q&A feature. Either way, once you're there, go ahead and post your questions. To make sure your questions are anonymous, our moderators and our host will be monitoring the Q&A, capturing those questions, and saving them for later in our session so we can address as many of them as possible. The earlier session we had this week, we actually were able to answer every single question. So that's our hope for tonight as well. If you see that your question has been removed from the Q&A tool, that's your signification or your signal that the question has been captured and that we will be addressing it later in the session. Again, just a quick reminder for those of you that may just be joining us, we're also asking you to continue to contribute to the thought exchange. I do know that this region's been pretty hot on the thought exchange. So we've got a lot of participants specific to this area. So that's really good. That's very helpful information. The reason we want you to participate in the thought exchange is not only does it allow the planning team to see your comments, thoughts, questions, and concerns, your things that you support, things that you'd like to see changed, it also is available to our entire Board of Education so they can see every comment that's posted, and members of your community have the ability to go in and rate your thoughts so that we can get a sense of how the community is feeling overall based on the different comments and the way that comments are being rated. So it is really, really helpful tool for us to better understand the sentiment of each individual community. I think we mentioned earlier that we will close this on October 5th, and we'll give a full summary of this along with all of the information we gather from our virtual information sessions and our open house later in September with the board at their October 21st work session. All right, so let's just make sure everyone has the same sort of ground level understanding. We'll do a very quick review of the process about how we got to the point where we have the recommendations that we do. So to ensure that you have a better understanding of how the recommendations are developed, we will take just a few moments to go through that planning process. And again, you can find more detailed information about this with the agenda attachments from the September 2nd board meeting, which is also linked from our website. So to start from the beginning, our policy that guides the student assignment process is Board Policy 4150, and it does include a specific section that gives us staff and the planning team guidelines for how we should develop assignment plans for the district. It does direct staff to balance, to the extent reasonable, the goals and factors identified by 4 specific or main pillars, and they are student achievement, stability, proximity, and operational efficiency. Each one of these has its own definition in policy. So I do encourage you who are interested to go ahead and read the entire policy. But to help everyone on this session have a better understanding of how it's defined, we're going to play a short video and then we'll jump right back into our presentation. And this video will help you to better understand how the policy directs staff to develop assignment plans.
Understanding student assignment. It's no secret that our school district is growing, and it's growing fast. That means each year we need to address overcrowded schools and often need to open new schools to keep up with this growth. To state the obvious, we may have to reduce the enrollment at an existing school or fill new schools with students. This is done through the annual student assignment process. To best understand when and where new growth is coming in our district, we conduct an annual enrollment forecast. This forecast helps us look ahead up to 10 years and project enrollment growth throughout the district. This information helps us update our capital improvement plan and to make more informed decisions related to school assignments. Each year, some students are assigned to one of our new schools or reassigned to an existing school. This ensures we have balanced school populations across the district. We know families love their schools and that student assignment decisions can be worrisome. That's why we want to be completely transparent in how we make them. Our school board has established 4 pillars that guide each and every student assignment decision. Here's what they mean and how they work together. Student achievement. We want all of our schools to provide the best academic opportunities for our students. This pillar compels us to think about whether a student assignment plan can help reduce high concentrations of poverty or low-performing students at some of our schools. Stability. Essentially, we try to keep as many children at their current school through the exit grade as possible. When reassignments are necessary, we provide the opportunity for some students to submit a stability transfer request and stay at their current school through the exit grade. Operational efficiency. This pillar is about making sure all of our schools and transportation resources are at their best use. Overcrowded schools are a problem. Classrooms packed with too many students are one thing. But then there are the endless carpool lines, bathroom facilities that can't comfortably accommodate everyone, and having to start lunch when most people are still working on breakfast. On the flip side, having under-enrolled schools is an inefficient use of public resources, particularly when there are crowded schools nearby. Proximity. Okay, this one can be a little tricky. In a perfect world, houses would be built in neat little rows on a predictable timeline and at a slow and steady rate. As it is, we live in an imperfect world where lots and lots of homes pop up in one area, while growth is slight or non-existent in others. For this reason, it is impossible to send every child to their most proximate school unless we want some of our schools bursting at the seams while others are half empty. That said, this pillar states that we will send students to schools within a reasonable distance. Often, the difference between the most proximate school and the next most proximate school is no more than a couple of miles. Please remember that we must consider all 4 of these pillars when making assignment decisions. There is no priority among the four that applies in every situation. It's a balancing act that ultimately helps us come up with the best possible plan for everyone. Thank you for working with us to ensure our school system continues to serve all students well.
We hope you found that video helpful and want to remind you that the video, along with all the other resources we're sharing in tonight's information session, can be found on the district's website. In addition to the guidance that you saw about Board Policy 4150, we also follow an annual planning cycle that has essentially 6 main steps. And we're currently in the 4th step of this process. And if you'll notice, if you can read the tiny type at the top, that process starts as early as March each year and goes through November of that particular enrollment cycle. So it's a lengthy process that we follow for step 4, in addition to all of the other items that lead up to the development of the plan. The first step in the planning process is the presentation of the annual enrollment or membership forecast. This forecast does provide both a 1 and 10-year projection for enrollment growth in the district. Even though it provides a 10-year outlook or a 10-year projection for the district, we do regularly update it. In fact, we update it annually to account for any changes in residential development patterns, home sales, birth rates, and other areas that can impact the forecast. Simply knowing how many students the district needs to be prepared to serve is helpful. However, knowing where that growth will occur or where changes in enrollment may occur throughout the district is really helpful when we're developing our annual enrollment plans. What you see here on this map is a depiction of the projected change in total student membership or student enrollment throughout various portions of the district. What you should notice is that growth is not evenly distributed throughout our district, and that some areas of the district are actually stabilizing and are showing minimal changes over the next several years. For purposes of today's conversation, I've highlighted the area that we'll be talking about today. The next step in the process is to then review the projected crowding for the coming school year. So in addition to providing that 10-year outlook that I mentioned, the annual forecast also provides a 1-year projection that we use not only to determine funding needs for the district, but also to help us predict crowding in our schools throughout the district. In this case, these projections were shared in March of 2025 and are for the current 2025-26 school year. As we get a little bit later into the school year and have an official head count, we'll redistribute this information based on actual on the ground crowding and membership. Um, in, in addition, you'll see that the circles here are highlighting the area that we're going to be talking about today at both the elementary, middle, and high school level. So just real quick, elementary, middle, and high school. The third step in our process is then to review the Capital Improvement Plan or CIP. This includes any adjustments that have been made during the annual review process for the CIP. In the map toward the top of your screen, you'll see some circles in green. Those are indicating for you the 3 new elementary schools and the 1 new high school that opened this school year. In this same map, you'll see the orange circle that popped up, and this is the location of the new Hilltop Needmore Elementary. We hosted a session on Tuesday about this particular area and the proposal for this area. So if you're interested, you certainly can review that recording on our website. The darker gray circles then let you know where the next set of new schools are coming. And as you can see, they're not in the west or the southwest anymore. They're starting to head a little bit northeast and east. And so those schools are projected to open over the next several years, up to 7 years from now. And so that's just something that the planning team uses to make sure that when we're making recommendations, we're thinking about those schools coming online as well. In this lower map, you can see also where all of the schools that are projected to have are scheduled to have major renovations. So in your mind, you could think of maybe a tear down rebuild. So these are schools that are prepared to have major renovations. Swift Creek Elementary, the one highlighted by the orange circle, is the only one on here that's projected to be complete in time for the 26-27 school year. The others will be in future years. I do want to pause and acknowledge before we move forward that all of these dates I'm sharing with you are subject to change based on market volatility, scope changes, and just all the things that can change a project schedule in the design, construction, and building phase of one of these major projects. So we are constantly partnering with our facilities design and constructions teams to monitor those to determine if there are any delays in projects. I have been asked before, is there a chance that those scope changes could make a school open earlier? And the answer is no. It would only be that it could potentially delay the start or the opening of a project or opening of a school. So once we've had a chance to look at the forecast, once we've looked at the potential crowding for the coming school year, and once we've taken stock of what's going on with our capital improvement plan and where we might have additional capacity online for the coming school year, we're ready to go ahead and dive into step 4 of the process and prepare the annual enrollment plan. The first step in that process is to initiate public engagement activities to capture thoughts and ideas from families and community members to help make sure that as the planning team develops the next enrollment plan, those unique perspectives are considered and taken into account. For this year's plan, these sessions were held specifically between March and May of the 2025 year. However, in this particular area, we've been having conversations for multiple years. So a lot of the recommendations you'll see in this plan are the result of the work of 2 and 3 years worth of public engagement to prepare for this particular plan. Here you can see a quick review of all of the participation just in the 2025 series. So from March until today, who's already participated. We'll update this information as we share with the board on October 21st, how well we've done with our virtual sessions and the current thought exchange, as well as the open house that is scheduled for later this month. You'll notice some plus numbers off to the side. That's because we shared this information with the board in June and then again on September 2nd. And so that plus just let them know the change in participation between the June report and the September report. For this particular area, I wanted to let you know that we have hosted a series of in-person sessions over the last few years in preparation for the opening of new schools. In fact, we could even go back to 2023 when we had our very first discussions about the opening of schools like Pleasant Plains Elementary. However, just specific to the recommendations that you'll see in this year's plan, these sessions were held in 2024 and 2025. You can see the total number of participants that were invited to come to the in-person sessions and how many actually were able to attend. So we have a roughly 1% attendance rate based on all of the invitations that are sent. And then as far as the thought exchanges go, similarly, those direct invitations were sent out to the same groups of families. And you can see that we had a little bit higher participation in those. Obviously, it's a little bit easier to participate in the asynchronous activities versus being able to come to that one in-person session. So we'll continue to find ways to engage the community, but we have been trying to collect information for several years to try to prepare for this year's plan. All of the details that were about the public engagement process, as well as a complete summary of all of the thoughts and ideas that have been captured throughout this process, are located in our public engagement summary report. An updated version was shared with the board on September 2nd, and we will continue to update this report as we go through this year's planning process for a complete set of information that related to the public engagement portion of the plan. What's really important, though, is what the planning team then does with that information. And so, yes, families and community members do have an impact on the planning process because they really help to refine outside of what needs to be done for, let's say, operational efficiency and to open a new school. What does the community want us to take into consideration when we're developing assignment plans? And it has been very clear over the last several years that stability of assignment is important, calendar continuity is important, cohort continuity or feeder pattern alignment is important. And then managing the capacity is important for our principals and for our staff. And it's also important for families to make sure that your students aren't in severely overcrowded schools. And then the policy guidance is really where the planning team is trying to balance and acknowledge that while families and community members are telling us very clearly that proximity and stability are of prime importance, we've got to balance that against those other 2 pillars of guidelines that we've been given, the student achievement and operational efficiency goals of the district. So just really ruminating on all of that in addition to the sort of data and evidence-based portions of the planning process. The next piece is to review the goals for the next enrollment plan with the board. And so when we went to the board in May, we were asked to develop not only the attendance area for Hilltop Needmore, but also be mindful of some of those planning implications, thinking about aligning middle and high school feeder patterns, thinking about calendar alignment where possible for those areas, and then to take advantage of any opportunities to backfill some of the existing schools that would be impacted by the opening of Hilltop Needmore. In addition to the recommendations that are all specifically related to the Hilltop Needmore, we were asked to look at things like the completed renovation project at Swift Creek that's scheduled to be done for 26-27. There's a minor renovation project at Fuquay-Varina Elementary. We've been asked to look to see if that capacity change might have an impact on the planning. And so the planning team did that. The next thing was then to also look at where we could continue to support our crowded schools, particularly when they were areas with continued growth, which speaks to today's presentation, and to try to find ways to support those schools and relieve the crowding at those schools, and also to continue to look at how we can improve efficiency in our transportation routes throughout the district. And then again, specific to today's presentation, we were very clearly asked to, and the planning team had actually proposed this to the board, that we bring in some feeder pattern recommendations to support families that were impacted by elementary school changes in last year's plan. So once all of that was confirmed, we continued looking at the public feedback that we were getting through online engagements. We started developing the plan and brought forward to the board on September 2nd the result of that work. Make sure we're on Pipire. There we go. Now, before we dive into our specific recommendations, I do want to highlight the next two steps in the process. So once we get through with the assignment planning process and have an officially approved 26-27 enrollment plan, then the district staff will start working on recommendations related to capped schools to determine, can any of the caps be removed? Do any of the caps need to be maintained? Are there new schools that potentially need to be capped because we weren't able to address the crowding and the growth in their area with either new construction or other tools in the toolkit? But I do want to note for you that in this area, all the schools highlighted in green are capped and in this region. So it's, as you can tell, this is a high growth, rapidly growing area that has been impacted by that growth and that crowding for quite some time. And a number of schools in this region are either severely overcrowded or at the very least capped. Once that set of recommendations is complete, then staff brings to the board any final lingering opportunities to perhaps use things like calendar conversion to support any of our utilization concerns. So just as a note, this year in the eastern part of the county, the board did approve that Lake Myra Elementary would go from being a track 4 school to a multi-track year-round school. And that increases the capacity of the school by just under 200 students, and that's to manage growth in that region. Again, all of the assignment planning process can be found on this page. This page is up all the time. It's only the enrollment proposal page that we've told you about today that is a time-limited page. So for those of you that might have joined us in the last few minutes and maybe didn't hear the initial instructions, if you do have questions, please use the Q&A feature in the Google Meet. Here you can see some basic instructions on how to access that tool. And again, we will be capturing those anonymously. So once you see that your question has been removed, that lets you know that our host or moderators have successfully captured the question and will address it later in our session today. So I do want to speed up a little bit so we can get to all those questions. And I have noticed that several people have been able to find that tool and use it. So just continue using that tool with any questions that you have during the presentation or as we get to the Q&A time period, excuse me. And of course, the thought exchange will remain open through October 5th. And again, it's really imperative that you continue to participate in the thought exchange, because that is the one source where every single board member can see every single thought. And then we can summarize that as a planning team and have the ability to review all of that information in one place. All right, let's jump in. So before we jump in, just really quickly, just remind you of all the things that we just said. So the recommendations that you'll see later in this session, as well as in the entire enrollment proposal, do reflect the guidance that's provided by Policy 4150, the input and feedback that has been gathered from families and community members for the last several years, our continued need to address capped and overcrowded schools while also being mindful of future school openings, Our desire to try to provide K-8 calendar continuity wherever feasible for families in response to that feedback that we're hearing from community about how important that is. The desire to provide even K-12 cohort or feeder pattern alignment so that students rising from 5th to 6th and 8th to 9th have a group of friends and peers that they can move forward in school with. And so we're trying to do that wherever we can in response to that feedback we've been hearing over the last several years. We do need to continue to reduce our high concentrations of poverty and promote integration and diversity per our policy directives. And we need to continue to support our operational efficiency needs, particularly in the area of transportation as well as in facility utilization. So now that we've reviewed all the work that's leading up to it, let's do a quick overview of all the schools impacted. And again, all the information specific to the proposal is found on this website. Anything about the general 6-step planning process you can find here. So just a quick overview of all the elementary schools that are impacted. In this region, all of these areas that are elementary level that are being proposed to have assignment changes are all directly or indirectly related to the opening of Hilltop Needmore Elementary in the Fuquay area. We won't review those tonight. The only ones on this side of town that are going to have elementary implications are highlighted here, and so we'll talk very specifically about those in just a few moments. And then you can also see in the east. The two that I just circled are specifically in response to addressing ongoing growth and crowding in those regions. At the middle school level, the recommendations that you see here are specifically related to the opening of Hilltop Needmore Elementary to provide calendar and feeder pattern alignment for those families. And here you'll see a couple of different sets of recommendations. One, to support the crowding implications that we needed to evaluate, as well as to provide calendar and cohort continuity for families impacted by those changes, and to provide calendar and cohort continuity for students that were impacted by last year's plan at the elementary level. On this side of the county, this is directly related to that elementary set of recommendations that I mentioned moments ago. And then last but not least, at the high school level, very, very few implications. This is specifically related to the opening of Hilltop Needmore and creating K-12 cohort continuity for families, as well as addressing some crowding issues in the region. And then here, you're seeing some recommendations specifically related to last year's elementary changes to create that cohort feeder pattern alignment for families. We know that stability rules are top of mind. So I have a feeling that a lot of the questions that are probably posted as soon as we open up our information sessions are related to this. So we'll dive into these and we'll answer them again, but we just want to talk through it really quickly. Because this region is not impacted by the opening of Hilltop Needmore Elementary, I'm not going to go through these particular rules, but I just want you to know there's a different set of rules when we open a new school than if we're moving students from one school to another that's already open and operating and already has students. And that's because we have to make sure we have enough students to go into the new school to operate it effectively and hire enough teachers to provide good quality academic programming. But here, you'll notice a little read me sticker. In this area, there are elementary changes specifically being recommended that impact students going to a school that's already open and asking them to be changed to a school that's also already open. In this case, because both schools already have a foundational population, the impacts aren't nearly as severe, so we can allow for a slower changeover. So let's be super clear. So in this region, we're looking at students currently assigned to White Oak Elementary that are proposed to be assigned to Turner Creek Elementary. In this specific example, any student that is already attending White Oak Elementary would be eligible under the stability rules to stay at White Oak with no transportation, and that's the compromise, but through the 5th grade. So if you have a current 1st grade student attending White Oak Elementary and you would like to put in the stability transfer, you're prepared to provide transportation or build a carpool system with your neighbors, you can do that. And then that student could stay at White Oak Elementary through the 5th grade. And that's what this piece says here. So any student who is a current kindergarten through 4th grader, or said differently, going to be in 1st through 5th grade next year, all of those students would be eligible to stay at White Oak. The only catch is they have to already be attending White Oak. If a student is a rising kindergarten sibling of one of those eligible students and you can get them pre-registered before the stability transfer window opens, you can also put in their stability request at that same time so your whole family's taken care of during that stability window. So that takes care of the 26-27 school year. So any student, if the board were to approve the plan as proposed currently, that is either at White Oak Elementary, and I believe there's a small section of Salem Elementary. So there's White Oak Elementary and Salem Elementary students that are being proposed to change to Turner Creek Elementary. All of those students that are currently attending those schools would be eligible for a stability transfer, even though White Oak is capped. They will get their stability transfers approved before we start looking at callbacks. So they get first priority for those seats before we start looking at the callbacks. And so that's something I want to really assure. And a previous session questions about, is there a cap on the number of students that can be approved, or is there a lottery? And the answer is no. The only catch is that you have to do it during the stability transfer window. That'll be in late November, early December. I can't give you specific dates yet. We're still working with the board on final approval dates, but it'll be right around the Thanksgiving holiday time period. It'll stay open for a good 10, if not more days. We'll remind you, we'll send you personalized individual emails. Your school principal will send you emails. You'll get phone messengers. Like, we will contact you multiple times during that period to make sure you're fully aware that the window has opened, that you're eligible. I think we send a total of 7 different messages to families if they don't apply during their first few days. So we will make sure that we inundate you with messages to remind you to fill out the transfer. It's an online request, super easy to do. You click through it pretty quickly. And so you'll want to do that during the stability transfer window. If you wait until March, when the regular transfer window opens, I can't guarantee that we can approve all of them, because at that point, particularly a school like White Oak that's capped, they might have already filled all of their available seats. So you got to do it during the late November, early December time period. In addition, something to think about: if you're not quite sure if you can provide the transportation, but you really would like to stay at White Oak or Salem Elementary, put the stability transfer in December so you hold your seat. And then if by the time we get to March, when that regular transfer window opens up and you go, you know what, I just found out my best friend's going to take their kid to the new school, or I've been learning more about that calendar and I really like it, or I really need transportation and I need to go to my base school, you can always put in what is called a back to base transfer during the March window, and we can approve those. So if you're not quite sure, get that stability transfer in that November to December time period, so you've got it in hand and you know for sure you've got that seat, but you can always give that seat up if you want to later in the process. So I spent a lot of time on that one because I know that's where a lot of our students are. The next place a lot of our students are is at the middle school level. Everybody on this call's address is probably going to be impacted by a middle school change. In the current proposal, there are recommendations for portions of Mills Park Middle to be assigned to Salem Middle, and portions of Lufkin Middle and Salem Middle to be assigned to Apex Middle. And so all of those students, if they're currently attending as a 6th or 7th grader today, and they're going to be a 7th or 8th grader next year, they're all eligible to stay if you can provide transportation. So you would do the same thing, put in those stability transfers. And if there's a rising 6th grade student, either coming up from one of our 5th grades or coming in new from, let's say, private, charter, or homeschool, they can put in that same stability transfer during that same window as long as you get them pre-registered. So all of those rules would be the same. And again, you can put in that transfer in the fall, get it, hold on to it. When you get to the spring, if you're like, we've had a change of heart, we want to do something different, you can always go back to base. And again, in this instance, there's just a few students that are impacted by the high school changes. So this is the carryover from the 25-26 plan. There are a handful of students, or a little chunk of students, that are being proposed to come from Apex Friendship High School into the Apex High School base. And again, that's to create a K-12 feeder pattern alignment of Balcom, Apex Middle, Apex High, which is a very logical feeder pattern for this portion of the community. And it's all traditional calendar on that set. So what those students could do is also put in the stability transfer. They can stay through the 12th grade. Those rising 9th grade siblings can also do the same thing. Again, the only catch is that you've got to put it in during the stability window and you have to provide your own transportation. All right, so we went through those a lot, and I'm sure we're going to have a bunch of questions that Jimmy's going to ask me that go through some specific nuance. If you haven't figured out how to post a question, this is how you do it, but it looks like a lot of people have found it. So let's now talk about the specific recommendations for this area. So the first set of recommendations, as I mentioned, are related to approvals from this year's plan. So the one that took effect in July of this year. The area highlighted in green are portions of what were the Olive Chapel Elementary Base and what were the Salem Elementary Base that now are part of the Balcom Elementary Base attendance area. As a result, these families only have the elementary level change. So their base assigned middle school is multi-track year round. So that created a calendar misalignment. We promised that community and the board directed us to find a fix, and we have a fix. So the fix for that is that this particular area, the area highlighted in blue previously was at Olive Chapel, is now at Balcom. Those students are being recommended to come from Lufkin Road Middle and now be assigned to Apex Middle as base. The section labeled with the number 2 are students that were previously at Salem Elementary that are now assigned to Balcom Elementary. And these addresses are now being recommended to come from Salem Middle and become part of the Apex Middle base. What you see here are the before and afters. All of the tables that have the blue coloring on the title bar are if we made no changes. So if we made no changes, the projected crowding for the 3 schools involved would look something like this for the 26-27 school year, and then it would potentially change to this by 27-28. If every single student were to take their new assignment for the 26-27 school year, the changes would look like this. We don't predict that that's what will happen. We know there are some families that will take their stability transfers. And so we don't think it'll be quite this big of a change, but we will start working toward that change over time as more and more students in those areas and those neighborhoods start attending their base school. So this specific set of recommendations is not really being made for capacity issues per se. As you can see, it does level out the utilization of the schools a little bit. It's really to give families that K-8 calendar alignment, as well as to create that cohort or feeder pattern alignment for students going from Balcom to Apex Middle to Apex High. So again, this is the high school portion of it. That same area is currently assigned to Apex Friendship High School, which still needs relief. It is still a capped high school despite the opening of Felton Grove. It is still experiencing severe overcrowding, and there's a lot of growth in its remaining portion of its base attendance area that we need to make room for students that are coming in. So this area is being proposed to become part of the Apex High School base. Again, every single student can do the stability transfer. So we don't think that this will happen right away. We don't think that that shift in percent crowding will change quite so quickly. We think Apex Friendship will continue to be, over 110% crowded for the time being because we think there'll be a lot of stability transfers. However, if anybody just wants to go ahead and go to Apex High, they're certainly more than welcome to do so. And so that's it for that set of recommendations. The next set of recommendations are specific to addressing crowding and continued growth in the region. So with this set of pictures, you can see on the top left, this shows the projected crowding for White Oak Elementary, a longstanding CAP school that has been well over 110% for a number of years and actively caps students out to their overflow school on a regular basis. So in addition, there's continued residential growth and development in their base attendance area that's going to continue to apply even more pressure on the school's capacity over time. In the same region, we have the base attendance area for Mills Park. We've been trying as hard as we can to not make it worse, but Mills Park has been capped for a very long time. It runs 200, 300, 400 students over its stated capacity. So it is severely overcrowded. Both of these schools have done an amazing job of managing that high enrollment. However, they have been severely overcrowded for a number of years. So to support the crowding predominantly at White Oak Elementary, but also at Mills Park Middle, and looking at the fact that this region is still not done growing. The base attendance areas for both of these schools still have a tremendous amount of projected growth. We're recommending a couple of changes. So one is to take the portion here that is west of 540 that is currently assigned to White Oak. So this upper portion and this lower portion that you see labeled as number 1, and have them become part of the Turner Creek base assignment area. In addition, for continuity, geography, so that it makes sense from a community and a travel egress portion, and there's some growth projected in this base attendance area, take the small portion of the Salem Elementary base attendance area and also align it to Turner Creek. And so that would allow White Oak to have some relief. that would allow Turner Creek, which has sufficient available seats to absorb that growth and to be able to serve those students well. We do recognize this is a calendar change, and we can talk through that in just a minute. But as you can see, the differential between the crowding across these three schools and how these proposals really do work to balance them a little bit better. And please know that Salem Elementary has significant growth in a portion of its base attendance area. So we're okay at this level because it's going to continue to grow over the next 10 years. With White Oak, what you don't see is that this projected growth will skyrocket in about 4 or 5 years and start to become something along the lines of 168% crowding, and that is just unsustainable. And so what this will do is relieve the crowding at White Oak, give it a little bit of room to absorb some of the new growth that's coming, and then we'll just need to continue to monitor that base. Reminder, these numbers are only if every single student that's projected to be reassigned takes the new assignment. As I mentioned earlier, all existing students would be eligible for a stability transfer, so we don't think it'll shift this quickly. We really feel like White Oak will continue to be somewhat overcrowded as they serve those stability transfer students for a couple of years, and as those communities eventually become part of the Turner Creek base attendance area and community. At the middle school level, for calendar alignment, as well as for cohort feeder pattern alignment, and to provide a little bit of relief to Mills Park Middle, we're recommending that the two portions that are currently assigned to White Oak Mills Park become Turner Creek Salem Middle. And so that's in response to community feedback that if you're going to reassign us, give us K-8 calendar continuity. If you're going to reassign us, give us some cohort and feeder pattern continuity. At this point, there's a big cohort of Salem middle students that also move on to Green Level High School. So we're not proposing any high school changes in this area because we think that's a logical feeder pattern for students to come from Salem Middle into Green Level. So we are not recommending a high school change at this time. What you'll see here is the projected impact. Again, we don't think every single student will move in that first year, but even with this move, we're still just chipping away at some of the crowding at Mills Park Middle. There's still sufficient crowding there. It is starting to level off in some portions of its attendance area, but it will then swing back into high gear, particularly the western portion of the White Oak attendance area where there's a lot of growth that's coming. So we will need to continue to look at Mills Park over time, and it will probably get some additional relief when Parkside Middle finally opens, and right now that's scheduled for 29/30. Do you have any questions? I think everyone's found the question box. All right, calendar application changes. So this is just another piece of the assignment plan that we just need to make sure we share with everyone, that as a result of some of these base assignment changes. So if you're at White Oak, you currently see Turner Creek as your multi-track year-round option. Well, if Turner Creek becomes your base, you don't need a multi-track year-round traditional calendar application school. Right now, we're proposing none. I have seen, and the planning team has been reviewing comments about, hey, could we have some sort of traditional calendar application option with transportation? So the planning team is reviewing that to see if there's a secondary recommendation that could be made that would allow for some sort of traditional calendar with transportation. I will say it's challenging because right now we've also been challenged to try to reduce our total number of bus routes. So there's a give and take, but that piece has been reviewed, and the planning team is looking at that. We'll have updates by the October 21st work session. Similarly, Salem Elementary going into currently sees Balcom Elementary as a traditional calendar. If they go to Turner Creek, that wouldn't make sense. But again, we're looking at whether or not we can take that feedback into consideration and see if there's not something that could be offered over here that maybe would come with transportation. At the elementary level, there's also a handful of schools across the district that still see two different calendar application options, which means buses that are routed into these neighborhoods pick up base students, and they then pick up students at calendar option schools and send them to two different schools. That's 3 buses for one community for 2 purposes. So we are really trying to reduce that. So these don't impact this area, but I just wanted to explain what these recommendations were related to. And then the last set of calendar application changes, again, are at the middle school level, and these are based on the base assignment changes. If you're currently base assigned to Lufkin with Apex as a traditional calendar, but Apex is going to become your base, then Lufkin should become your year-round calendar, right? So that way you've got that continuity with transportation. If you're currently at Mills Park and you see Salem as a multi-track year-round option, but Salem becomes your base, all of Salem currently sees Apex as their traditional calendar option, so that makes more sense for students in that community because then you'd have a cohort that you could follow. The Salem Middle School students that are currently base assigned at Salem Middle, they see Apex Middle as a traditional calendar option. Well, if Apex becomes your base, then you don't need a traditional calendar option, but you would potentially still need a year-round option, and all of the Apex Middle students see Lufkin as their application option. So that's what we would maintain there. And so that's the sort of reasoning behind that set of changes being recommended. All of that information is on the website, and certainly you can ask any question you want later on, but I just wanted to get to your questions as fast as I can. So again, all the stuff's on the website. We're going to continue to update our FAQs. In fact, we updated them today based on our session on Tuesday. So just keep giving us questions. We will keep working to make sure that all of those answers are posted there. All right, so that's all of the recommendations, but let's quickly look at the timeline before we jump into the questions, because I want you to know where we are in the process. So September 2nd, we went to the board and shared with them that initial set of recommendations based on all of that feedback that I shared with you, including all of the data sets and the evidence that we've been evaluating based on projected growth, capital improvement, capacity gains, any calendar changes that were approved by the board, all of that sort of stuff. What we're doing now is hosting a bunch of information sessions. We'll have a open house. We have our thought exchange open, and the planning team is looking at all of that information and looking to see if any revisions should be proposed at the October 21st board work session. In addition, we're pulling all of that information together so we can share it with the board so they're keenly aware of what the concerns are for each area of the district that's impacted by the plan. So the next time we'll go before the board is October 21st. At that point, it'll still be a draft. It'll just be a revised draft, and we'll still be sharing information that we're collecting from the community. In addition, in response to community feedback over the last couple of years, they've moved up their public hearing. So if you've participated in this process in the last couple of years, the public hearing is usually 1 or 2 weeks prior to the approval of the final draft. And several community members pointed out, it just feels disingenuous. It feels as if there's not enough time for the board to respond to what they're hearing at the public hearing before making a final decision. And so the board heard that, the planning team heard that. We made a recommendation that we would up that to that October 21st board work set or board meeting. And so at that board meeting, you'd be eligible if you'd like to. You can sign up to speak at the public hearing and talk specifically about the plan. And you'll also have had the opportunity to hear what revisions were proposed during the work session just prior. That'll give the board and the planning team sufficient time to respond to any new or different ideas that might come up during the public hearing, so that by the time the board is asked to review and evaluate and approve the final draft of the plan on November 18th, they'll have sufficient context for that decision. What we're doing, obviously, we're hosting this session tonight. We already held one earlier this week. We've got one more next week to talk with the community out east. And then we're going to have an open house on September 24th. Got a lot of questions about who all should go. Anybody who's impacted by the plan is welcome to join us at the open house. We will have staff from the receiving schools there. So if you have questions about what's your school like? How do you handle IEPs? Any kinds of questions you might have about your student specific needs, we'll have staff at the open house. In addition, we're going to have staff from other departments across the district. So if you want to ask questions about transportation or child nutrition services, before and after school care, those kinds of things, we'll have staff from all of those departments at the open house. It's sort of a one-stop shop. It will be hosted at the new Hilltop Needmore Elementary site in Fuquay Arena. And I realize that's not the most proximate location, but that is where the most students that are being impacted by the plan are. And so that's where we're going to host it. In addition, it's my understanding that some of the receiving elementary and middle schools in the region are open to hosting tours and things like that. So just reach out to the schools and look out for information from your principals and from your PTA about how to learn more about those new schools. Those new school assignments, I should say. All right, everybody knows how to find the questions. So I think we're ready, Jimmy. I'm going to take a drink of water while you share a little bit of information, and then I think we'll jump into our questions.
So thank you, Susan. I know you do need to take a break. While we have a quick break, I do want to welcome District 9 Board of Education member Tyler Swanson to the meeting. We appreciate you being part of this and participating in this process. So thank you for being here. So again, it's not too late. We are still collecting questions on the Q&A. We have quite a few, and we will do our best to try to get through most of those. And I may take a little liberty in combining some questions. So your question may not sound exactly how you wrote it, but we'll try to cover as many questions as we can. And also, continue to participate with the thought exchange, right? that's another way to make sure your questions and your concerns and comments are recorded for consideration in future deliberation. All right, Susan, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. So we will start with calendar. We've got a number of calendar questions that folks had. Some of those revolved around specifically, was there any consideration changing the calendar of Turner Creek and Salem to match the calendar of White Oak and Mills Park from year-round to traditional?
Sure. Excellent question. At this time, because of the growth in the region and the capacity needs in the region as a whole, we really did not make that recommendation. We felt that keeping those schools multi-track and allowing more students to fill into those schools and to then be there to absorb some of the future growth that's coming, that was the more prudent or operationally efficient recommendation to make. So no, at this time, staff was not making any recommendations that the board consider changing the calendar of either of those two schools. In fact, I'm going to take a little liberty. That's a large part of that is also in response to when we came out to particularly like the White Oak Mills Park community, when we came out to that region a couple of years ago and had the first conversation about, hey, this school's really overcrowded and growth is continuing to come. Would you prefer to go multi-track so more students could stay there? And it was very clear that keeping the traditional calendar was much more important. And in this particular area, it works out okay because there is a nearby school with available capacity that can support some of the overcrowding in the area. So it was trying to find that right mix between honoring community desires to stay traditional for those students who could stay assigned to White Oak, and then having that available capacity nearby.
Thank you. And there have also been multiple questions about the traditional calendar options for those students being reassigned to year-round, and what options do they have for traditional calendar, and really how will that be evaluated case by case for those parents who want to stay on a traditional calendar?
So we'll start with the stability rules. If any family is eligible, they're currently already attending the school, they're eligible for the stability rules. That's one way to keep your traditional calendars, put in that transfer and ask to stay at your current school, and you can maintain your traditional calendar that way. As I mentioned during the presentation, there's been some question about whether or not a specific traditional calendar application school with transportation could be identified for the areas that are being proposed to come into Turner Creek. And so we're evaluating that. We'll see what we can come up with by the time we get to October 21st as a potential revision there. If that's not possible, if there's just not a way to find additional routes for buses, that does never preclude someone from actually just putting in a transfer or even using maybe our magnet application process. You'll hear us talk about that a lot. A lot of our magnet schools do operate on the traditional calendar. So not only could you get the traditional calendar, you get the amazing programming that's available at those schools. And several of those, particularly in this region, do come with some form of transportation, either neighborhood stops or express stops. So families could look at the magnet options and see if that would be something that would work for their family. They could look then also at the hardship transfer process and see if there's a traditional school in the area that they can provide transportation to that isn't capped or overcrowded, that perhaps staff could evaluate. And then I think I heard you say something about how are decisions made on those. So for magnets, it would be the lottery process, and all of that's on the magnet webpage. For stability transfers, those are the rules we've talked about tonight. If you put it in during the stability window and you're eligible, there's no consideration. You just get approved, right? That's you're eligible. You get approved. During the regular hardship transfer window that opens up in March, we do have to look at the policy guidance that's given to us in a later part of 40U150 that talks about transfers. So we do have some ability to approve some of those transfers based on family needs, family hardship, and so those are all evaluated on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you for that response. There are also some questions that address how we balance the pillars of student assignment and enrollment, and how some of the comments and questions where it appears that changing a child's calendar or moving their school does not acknowledge stability as being one of the pillars, and just talk
Sure.
about how you work through how we work through balancing the pillars across the entire district.
Yeah. I don't want to say like watch the video, but in the video, I think it articulates it really well. We try very hard to balance all four pillars, but not all four pillars are of equal weight in every situation and in every community. They're not specifically prioritized in any particular order. I will say in this region, operational efficiency is kind of really a highlight because we do have capped and overcrowded schools that need relief, and we have a handful of schools with some available capacity that can help support that need. But when we're talking about stability, I do not want to be cheeky here, but our stability definition and policy is simply that if a student is reassigned and they're rising into fifth, eighth, or 12th grade, we would make provisions that they could stay. So it's not defined the way that a lot of families think it's defined. However, push that off to the side. We hear very clearly from our community that stability for them is being able to keep the same school assignment for a number of years, either as a community or as a family. And that is what has led to the more generous stability rules that have been proposed over the last 2 or 3 years for families impacted by reassignments so that more students can stay at their current school. We did have to make the compromise of no district transportation because there's just not a way to provide routes in all those different directions. But if families can figure out a way to carpool or provide their own transportation, they are welcome to take advantage of those stability rules because we do recognize that a change in school assignment that also comes with a change in calendar, that is something that families have shared with us could be destabilizing for them as an individual family. And so that's where those generous stability rules are trying to address that need.
Thank you. And there are some specific questions about the Davis Drive schools and have we considered using space there for traditional calendar options for some of these families that want to stay on that calendar.
And that's consistent with what the planning team has seen in the thought exchange. So that's something that's under review and consideration. I don't want to make any promises. It's a little too early in the process to share what revisions might come, but they're being evaluated. I just want to be mindful that some of our schools that do appear to have capacity might also have growth in their base attendance areas, or maybe supporting a number of trailers that are aging and perhaps aren't able to, be used for a long time. So we are trying to, again, balance that operational efficiency need with using available seats, trying to find a way to give families long-term solutions, because we do know, particularly in the West, our Cary, Morrisville, Apex area, even Holly Springs at this point, have been impacted by such rapid growth that regular reassignments have just become so normal. And we're trying really hard to reduce that and think much more longer term. So the recommendations we're making now are designed to stand a test of time a little bit longer so that we're not reassigning students, let's say, every 3 years. We're trying really hard not to do that.
Okay.
So we have to think about all of that before we say yes or no that we could make something an option.
Thank you. That's helpful. I think gives a good perspective on the larger picture of the district. We'll ask some questions about stability. A lot of interest there. And if we have time, we can circle back to some calendar questions. So it might just be helpful just to review all of the stability rules again, because I think many of these questions could be answered with just kind of that general just who do the stability rules apply to, who do they don't, and I think really clarifying if you've not ever attended a school, stability rules apply. Like if you're in the overflow at Davis Drive, how are you considered in the stability
or
rules?
even West Cary Middle, perhaps, for some of these families? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to quickly start here on this slide that we reviewed earlier. This is not this region. All right. So if someone has joined us from the Southern region, there are very specific rules for the opening of a new elementary school. So I won't spend time on those, but we'll go here. If you're a student who is currently attending White Oak Elementary or Salem Elementary, and your student is proposed to become part of the Turner Creek base, you would have the eligibility to put in that request asking for the stability transfer to stay. And I want to clarify, the reason we make you take that step is we don't want to automatically presume that you could pull that off without transportation. So we will initially assign your student, whatever part of this that is approved, we will initially assign your student to the newly assigned school. So in this case, that would be Turner Creek Elementary. Then right immediately afterward, you can pop in during a very special window that'll be late November, early December, be able to put in your request. If your student is currently overflowed Their stability option would be for the overflow school because it's about providing stability of school assignment, not stability of base assignment. So if your student is currently living in the White Oak Basin has been overflowed to Davis, then Davis becomes that school that they have the eligibility to stay at. So if you wanted them to stay at Davis Drive on transfer because you've developed relationships with the staff there and you like the calendar and you can figure out how to drive there, that's fine. But you wouldn't have any access to White Oak because your student didn't actually attend White Oak. If you have a rising kindergarten sibling that doesn't have a student, excuse me, that doesn't have any older siblings, they also wouldn't be eligible because they've never attended the school. So those are the, I hate to say the no's, but those are the nots, right? So if your student has never actually attended White Oak Elementary and is not currently in attendance at the school when the board approves the plan, they would not be eligible. Now, for those of you that are at the school and have students that would be eligible, there's a little bit of rest of assurance that because your student's enrolled, they automatically have that eligibility. If you put in the transfer, we'll approve it. If families move in later in the school year, they are not automatically eligible because they're now part of the new assignment plan. They've moved in after the approved change. So they would not be eligible to remain at the school. So those of you that have that longer standing relationship with the school, you would be the ones with the rights to those seats, if you will. Should I clarify more or should I do the middle schools?
Yeah, I think so. There have been questions at every level.
Okay, perfect. So at the middle school, so the middle schools now in this region, there's two sets of recommendations. There are portions of the Mills Park Middle Base that are being recommended to become part of Salem Middle. There's portions of Salem Middle and Lufkin Middle that are being recommended to become part of Apex Middle. There's some nuance here because in some of those cases, there might be a calendar application school that's still being identified for your student. So we might be able in a handful of cases to maintain your assignment and give you some transportation. So there'll be some nuances there. And I'm going to point everybody back to that email. So if you've got a specific question about your child and your family and your specific school assignment, our team is more than happy to help you think through how those rules would affect your specific family. And I'll show you that in just a moment. But in this case, again, if the students are currently attending Mills Park Middle in 6th or 7th grade and they want to stay for 7th or 8th grade and they're in that impact area, they'd be eligible to do so. And if you have a younger 6th grade sibling coming in for that same year, they could also join them and stay under that sibling match rule. Both would be eligible to stay through the 8th grade. The tricky part that we probably haven't addressed, Jimmy, is that what happens if I have a kindergartner coming up in a couple of years? Or I have a 6th grader coming up in a couple of years, not for 26, 27, but maybe 27, 28. So in those situations, we're looking for that anchoring sibling. As long as that anchoring sibling is still going to be attending the school the year that that younger student is coming in, the regular transfer rules would allow us to bring your siblings together. So I'll say that again. If you've got a 1st grader today at White Oak and you have maybe a 3 or a 4-year-old at home, that's not going to be ready for kindergarten in 26, 27. You would do the stability transfer for your rising 2nd grader now. And so for 26, 27, they'd attend. And then when 27, 28, or even 28, 29 rolls around, then you would just use the regular transfer period to ask that that rising kindergarten sibling be able to join their older sibling. And we're allowed to approve those for sibling match. Which means the more families that take those transfers, the more overcrowded the school will be for a little while as it continues to slowly shift over and accept the new assignment at the newly assigned school.
And so there were also some questions about, so if I take the stability waiver at White Oak, so I'm able to stay there through all my years, does that waiver allow me to stay in my, what was assigned, well, my former base school, like Mills Park, and on, or does that, does that cut off at the end of the terminal grade?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. That does cut off at the end of the terminal grade. So if there's, as I said, the anchoring sibling rule, if there's not an anchoring sibling at the school to bring in that younger sibling, you would not automatically be eligible to have your student attend just because it was your base once upon a time. That we just don't have the space or the capacity to provide the provisions that long out into the future. I mentioned earlier, if you have a very unique and specific question about your student and you want to just say, hey, I want to give somebody in the staff my child's name and let them look them up and look at my address and give me a very specific answer, you are certainly more than welcome to use our student assignment at wcpss.net email, and one of our staff will be more than happy to respond to your questions.
And there was a question about stability for students with disabilities who may have an IEP, and is there any special consideration for those needs when we look at stability or transfers and those kind of things?
First and foremost, our special education team is going to do everything they can to serve students at their base assigned school. We're going to make sure the services are provided. We're going to make sure that if we need a transition team meeting to help the student prepare for a transition to a new school assignment. So if you choose to, and you want to go to your new school that's being assigned to your base attendance area so you can take advantage of the transportation, absolutely know that our teams will be here to support you in making that change. However, if you choose to stay at your current school because you're eligible under the stability rules, there's not unique stability rules for students with IEPs, if that's what the question is asking. They have the same gen ed stability rules that everybody else does. But I do know that the thinking behind what choice should I make might be a little bit different for those families. And so I would really encourage them to talk with their IEP teams and think about, should we put in a transfer and be prepared to drive our student and so they can stay at their current school, or should we prepare a transition team meeting so that we can transition to the new site and be prepared to be loved, accepted, welcomed, and served at our new school. So they kind of have the best of both worlds in this particular situation. But no, to be clear, there's not a specific set of rules for students with IEPs. It's the same rules for all students.
All right. I think that explanation addressed in part a lot of the questions that were asked around stability, because some of them really were about, they understand the stability in their current school,
right?
But they're concerned, how does that relate to, I've got a high schooler, I've got a middle schooler, and that, yeah, there has to be a student anchoring them
right
in that next school in order for
yes.
there to be any kind of continuation of assignment. If not, then they would be assigned to the base school.
Correct. And I will clarify, because I'm not sure that everybody knows that, as a student is rising into sixth or rising into ninth, they are automatically assigned to the base school for their attendance area to start with. That's their starting point. And then if they want to participate in magnet applications or put in hardship transfers or anything like that, they're welcome to participate in those processes. But you will always default to the base assigned school when you're doing those grade level transitions between fifth and sixth and eighth and ninth.
You've got a specific question that'll maybe allow you to explain the transfer process in general.
Okay.
The family's got two children at White Oak. The older one is going to be transitioning to middle school, okay. And so that new assignment would be Salem, but they'll still have another child at White Oak in the stability waiver. How would they get their child to potentially get to go to Mills Park, or is that a possibility?
Mills Park would most likely not be a possibility because the school is capped, and our transfer policy directs staff not to approve transfers into a capped school unless they meet very specific criteria, which would be you're eligible under stability. So you would be looking for a different traditional option if you didn't want to do the calendar mismatch. So you could either take advantage of the calendar application option that was offered through the address lookup tool, type thing, or you could put in a request for transfer for your middle school student to go to a different school that runs on a traditional calendar. But the likelihood that they would be approved into Mills Park is very, very, very slim, if not, I know staff would not be able to do it.
And
that's true for all of our CAP schools.
Yeah. And there was a specific question about someone who's been involved in reassignments before and remembers the time when only fifth graders were part of the stability. And you want to explain about how that process was placed and how we are where we are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this feedback has been really important over the last several years. It used to be that when we opened a new elementary school, only fifth graders could stay at their current school, and younger siblings could only stay for the 1 year that the fifth grader was there. And the year that the fifth grader moved on to sixth grade, the younger kids would be sent to their base school for the address, the new base school for the address. Hearing from the community, Hey, we've developed relationships with these schools. Maybe we're on the PTA, perhaps we've been part of some booster work, or maybe I'm a volunteer at the school. We've just developed a relationship with the school. If my older student um, stays and the younger students stay with them for that 1 year, can't the younger ones just keep on staying through the end of 5th grade? And so the planning team proposed that to the board and they were generous enough to approve that. So these are much more generous stability rules than we've ever had for our new schools and even more generous for our existing schools. This piece in here about through the end of 5th grade, that is new over the last couple of years, and that is specifically in response to community feedback, crunching the numbers, talking with principals, and understanding that that would be better for families. It gives you both choices. As the younger students get a little bit older, if more students in the community are going to the newly assigned school, then you can always do a back to base transfer and start going to that school at that time. I see that a handful of people are trying to use the raise hand feature. We're not using that in this session today, so I would just encourage people to put questions in the Q&A tool. If they have a very specific question about their individual family, again, use that student assignment email, and a staff member will talk with you about your specific concerns.
All right, we're going to talk some specific neighborhoods maybe and
Okay.
some specific processes, and we'll start generally. What is the criteria Wake County uses when and which year they choose to reassign students? What is that process? And when developments aren't complete, there's still things. How is that factored into the decision making?
Sure. So, quick little information session here. Wake County Public Schools is responsible for building and constructing and operating the schools. We have no say on what individual municipalities do in terms of approving residential development. Now I'm going to pause. There are 2 municipalities, Apex and Holly Springs, that are specifically reaching out to the district before they approve residential developments and asking what impact it would have on the local area schools. So that's part of their decision-making process. We do have good relationships with all of our municipal planners. So don't get me wrong. We have a lot of two-way communication. They're sharing with us what they're doing, but they're not obliged necessarily to ask our opinion or for us to weigh in on that decision. So oftentimes, particularly what we've seen in the last, I guess, 20 years, it's just not stopped. The high rate of growth in our district has just not stopped. It's a wonderful thing. It means our county is growing, it's healthy, it's vibrant. We have a good economic outlook. We have a good quality of life. All of those things that make living here so wonderful have just attracted more and more and more people over the last decades and is continuing to do so into the future. And so candidly, we just can't stay caught up with the residential development. Our building program for schools, there's just not sufficient funding, and that's not a knock. It just is what it is, limited resources. We just can't build schools fast enough to keep up with all of that growth. So what we do is we try to look as far out as we can, and we try to allow schools to stay as stable as they can with their assignment areas as long as possible. But when it really starts to get to a point where it's just so overcrowded, we have to do something to provide relief so that the quality of education is maintained in that building, especially when we have available capacity nearby. Couple of things that we can do. One, yes, we can try to build a new school, and when that's possible, we do that. We can try to reassign to a nearby school that has available capacity so we can provide that relief and support the school that has some open space. We used to rely a lot on trailers. We've kind of got as many as we can really stand to operate right now. So we're trying really hard not to rely on that. But sometimes, even into the future, we may still have to add trailers to campuses to try to expand capacity at the campus. And then another tool in the toolbox is looking at the calendar of the school. If the school is severely overcrowded, we might recommend making it multi-track so that it can take on those 200 or so extra students with the track in and the track out. And vice versa. We do have portions of our district that are finally, we've got enough schools in the area, the population is stabilizing. We might take those multi-track schools and maybe reduce them to traditional or single track. And you've seen that in the news probably in the last couple of weeks. So what prompts us to make an enrollment proposal every year, our history has been every year we come to the board with some sort of assignment recommendations. It is very rare that we skip a year because we have been growing so rapidly. Recently, the opening of new schools has really driven a lot of what the recommendations are, because we need to fill those new schools and then show all the impacts that happen around that area. In addition, we're continuing, like I said, to monitor our overcrowded schools to see where there's schools that have available capacity that might support that effort. And we are being responsive to community feedback about longstanding issues like feeder patterns and cohort continuity. So all of those things sort of build up to this year's plan will address these few issues because that's what next year's plan will address these few issues because they're related to this, and so forth and so on. So the community feedback piece has actually become more and more important over the last couple of years to drive what gets included in a set of recommendations.
All right, couple specific neighborhoods. So there were a couple questions that addressed the Greenmore community being split. That part of the community is attending one school and part is attending another school, and just how we work through those kind of things.
Sure. Looking here, it's these sort of regions. I believe we're talking about the southern edge of this particular set of recommendations, and you can see that there's a portion that stays pink, if you will, or rose-colored, that would remain assigned to White Oak Elementary. At this time, if you can see there we go. If we see the resulting changes, what we've recommended balances the schools a little bit better. If we were to take more students out of White Oak and assign them to Turner Creek, it would be a little too much too soon. Because you can see that White Oak would come down to about 98%. If we were to take even more students out of White Oak and bring them into Turner Creek, that would be too much of an impact on White Oak. It would reduce them too quickly, because the growth that's coming in this portion and this portion of their attendance area is not fully built out yet. So we're just making space. So when we looked at this area, there is a natural creek that divides this particularly large subdivision into two pieces. So we use that natural space. We also looked at the fact that the portion on this side does have some pretty easy egress to Roberts Road, which is a nice connection toward Turner Creek. And that this portion also has some natural egresses that go towards Green Level Church, which would then be a little bit more accessible to White Oak. So it was really about reducing White Oak, but not reducing White Oak too far, too fast. And because this is a large subdivision, and we have this throughout the district as much as we can, we really try not to split subdivisions, but when they're really large, we do at least try our best to make sure they're not going to more than two schools. So this sort of hits and honors that sort of practice that we've been following over the last couple of years, is that if I've got a large subdivision that does need to be split up, we try really hard to only send it to two separate elementary schools versus 3 or 4. So that was the thinking behind that, was that if we continue to grab more students from down here and assign them into Turner Creek, that would just be too many students reduced from White Oak too fast. And candidly, I'm going to say it a little bit differently too. Our goal through stability is to try to leave as many students at their current assigned school as we possibly can. And so there's that too. So if we don't need to reassign families to accomplish the goals, we try to leave them assigned at the current school versus changing them for change's sake.
And some of the families, multiple questions, kind of reconcile. How do we reconcile the projected growth in the White Oak area that has not, maybe not have even broken ground yet, and that we are shifting current families who are in established neighborhoods to different schools? Why not wait until those are built and we move the new kids and not the established families?
So there's 3 elements to that question. One is White Oak is already severely overcrowded. I know that they've done a great job of supporting their students despite that crowding, and they've done an amazing job of figuring out how to creatively use their facilities so students are getting high quality academic programming despite being 110, 115% crowded. But as a district, that's not our goal. Our goal is not to ask principals and schools and staff to run at such high rates. We want them to be, fitting in their facility spaces the way we originally intended. Because it's inequitable, when you've got schools that are at or just below capacity and some that are severely overcrowded. We want to create equity of academic experience across the district. Number 2, the growth. So the growth is there, right? Second, Turner Creek has available space now, and it doesn't have growth in its space attendance area. So taking students that already exist and are already in houses makes better sense to both relieve White Oak and take advantage of the space at Turner Creek. Yet, the super generous stability rules give families time to think about how quickly they want to migrate to that new assignment. There's the parents have and the families have some choice. And then the third part is we hear a lot, assign the new neighborhood to a different school that maybe isn't established or isn't developed. So obviously, one, that doesn't relieve White Oak's crowding today. And two, that would then create sort of hopping and skipping where, students that are here would have to drive past this school to get to that school. And yes, that does happen in our district. There are a handful of locations where that's just, you see one over here, we're driving all the way out here to get to Turner Creek. It's not as far as the map makes it look, but there's a distant assignment and we have this chunk, kind of going to Salem because we had to. But if we don't have to, we're trying not to do that in response to community feedback where families that's happened to say, wait a minute, just because I'm in a new subdivision, I have to drive past two schools to get to my school. So it's balancing the needs of both sets of families, while really in this case, it's about providing immediate relief to the current crowding concern at White Oak while preparing for the future growth. So there's a lot in there.
There is, and I think that answered some of the questions from other communities like Southernly. Why are they being so far to Salem and those kind of things?
The areas that are up here. Yeah.
Yeah. So before our time is kind of coming to a close, and so I want you to have an opportunity to remind folks about how they can continue to participate. What are the specific opportunities they have to participate in person, and just how does this move forward? Are there changes really made in the plan at this point? And just kind of help folks understand how we move forward.
Absolutely. So I'll kind of sit on this slide so people can see these are the easiest ways to continue to participate in addition to coming to the open house. To answer the question about, is it all set in stone? No, it's not set in stone. Every year we have some revisions between the initial draft and the revision that we present to the board in October. I don't want to act as if it's going to be wholesale changes, big magnanimous changes. The planning team has put a lot of effort into coming up with a balance between what the community needs and what the district needs and what our schools and our students and our principals need, and feel that this is the best set of recommendations we can make. Yet, errors can happen or oversights can happen. So any feedback that families are providing is really helpful in determining whether or not revisions are recommended. And you'll see a very thorough review of all of that in the October 21st presentation to the board. In addition, because it does take so much work, there's nothing that we can just pop out there and say, hey, we're going to change this. Give the planning team time to really fully evaluate all of the thoughts, suggestions, ideas, recommendations, and considerations, so that by October 21st, we'll have a really good, solid, robust review of all of that information, including any recommended changes. So there's that. And then as far as participating, I do want to remind all of you that are on the call tonight that the open house on September 24th is not this. It's not an information session, right? That's what this is for. It's really an opportunity for you to talk with staff from various departments, talk with the staff at the school that might be receiving your students if you were to not put in a stability transfer, to just get a better sense of how your student will be welcomed, what the cultures of the school are like, and just feel a little bit better about the recommendations that are being made. If you have specific questions about how it might impact you, again, I would encourage you to use that student assignment email I showed you earlier, studentassignment@wcpss.net, and our staff is more than happy to help you answer your specific questions about how things might impact your student. But if you really want to have conversations with the board per se about recommendations that you'd like for them to consider, use the thought exchange and perhaps consider signing up for the public hearing that'll be held on October 21st.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And there have been a few questions about any additional construction in the area. Is there prediction of any new schools coming into this area?
So we showed that earlier in capital improvement plan. Where are you? Please don't look too quickly. I'm gonna go fast. There's a video in there somewhere. There we go. All right. So The only new schools coming to the region are Morrisville High School and Parkside Middle. So there are no more elementary schools proposed to be added to this region. You can see Pleasant Plains opened this year. A year ago, Woods Creek Elementary in this region opened. So at this point, there is no identified major new construction project for the region. In the Cary area, there are a handful of schools that are projected to have major renovations, and those could potentially add capacity, but they're a little bit more east from the area we've been talking about tonight. However, that could free up some seats and perhaps allow for a little bit more, breathing room in the general region. But overall, no, there are not any new elementary schools coming online in the near future. This goes out 7 years, so I'm going to miss it. It's either 2030, 31 or 2031, 32 is what this carries us out to. So we're looking into the 2030 years basically before we're even considering adding new schools. I would encourage those of you that are interested in this type of work to pay attention to the facilities committee meetings because they do talk about the capital improvement plan on an annual basis. So if there are new schools that'll come online in the region, that would be where they would be first announced.
Excellent. And I think there were some questions from some families that, they're really proud of the school they're at. They may have some concerns about the performance at the school they may be moving to and how maybe that can be addressed at the open house coming up and meeting
Absolutely.
some staff at Turner Creek.
Yeah. And all of our schools, it sounds like a platitude, but all of our schools are amazing schools, and all of our staffs want to serve your students and provide for them the best academic opportunities. I've had some early conversations with the staff at Turner Creek in particular, and also Salem Middle. They're prepared to serve all the students that show up at their school. And if they have a higher concentration of students that need something that maybe isn't highly needed today, they're prepared to pivot and add those resources in and provide that support. I know topics like single subject acceleration and the AIG programs, and I know they have a robust history with some STEM continuity. I mean, their enrollment's having some issues, but just as a community, it's a school that's really excited about the chance to welcome new students and to grow some of their programs. And so I think talking with the staff at the school would definitely be beneficial for families that might be a little wary or nervous about what types of academic offerings would be available.
Thank you very much. And last question, and then we'll close up. The questions that we may not have gotten to, what do we do with those?
Okay, so what we do, not tonight, but starting tomorrow morning, we'll go through every single question that was posed. And if it's not already addressed in our online FAQs, or if it's a slightly different version of our online FAQs, we will create a new one, we will update it, and we will post it here. So if you'll go bookmark this website for the next couple of months, this is one you could probably check once a week or once every 2 weeks for updates and new information. But there's a portion of that website that's dedicated to frequently asked questions. So any question we couldn't get to tonight, or that might be for another department. At our session on Tuesday, we had some questions related specifically to special education services. That's not our area of expertise. So we've reached out to that department to get answers to those questions, and we'll post those on the website as well. So I would encourage families that feel like maybe their very specific question wasn't answered to check the FAQ, or if they have a very nuanced question about their own family situation, to have a private conversation with one of our staff members by emailing studentassignment@wcpss.net.
Thank you so much. And one final note, we were encouraged to share that the even though the District 8 board is vacant at this time, that the email is being monitored. So if you do want to provide feedback to the board, in a sense, that you are encouraged to email that to district8 at wcpss.net. So they do want you to know that your concerns will be heard, even though that's a vacant position at this time. So we thank you for joining us tonight. Ms. Pulliam, thank you for all of your time. We hope this session has been informative and that you have a better understanding of the recommendations included in this initial draft. Separately, we appreciate your open and honest participation. Your input and feedback is vital to the refinement of the enrollment plan. Remember, we will present a summary of your feedback received and any recommended adjustments to the proposed to the board on October 21st, with a final vote that is expected November 18th. The thought exchange will remain open through October 5th. We encourage you to continue to post comments, rate comments, and explore the exchange. Please continue to monitor your email and the district website for information about upcoming events, updates to the FAQ section on the enrollment plan page. Again, thank you. Thank you for your time, for your participation, and we hope you enjoy the remainder of your evening. Have a good evening. And thank you
Good
again, Board
evening.
Member Swanson, for participating.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone.
Good night.